Hello guys, welcome to DrNightStare. I know you guys come here to relax and take a nap. So before we go, please hit like and subscribe. By the way, also tell me what time and where you guys listening from. Alright then. Alex found himself drawn to Clara, captivated by her, in a way that tightened his chest and stole his breath when she merely spoke his name. It was the kind of silent adoration that asked for nothing, living quietly within him. He envisioned innocent moments, walking home together after class, sharing earbuds, the brush of hands that would leave him sleepless. Normal, unblemished, safe. In the sprawling history lecture hall, Clara always chose a seat 2 rows ahead of Alex. He would watch the subtle shift of her shoulders when she laughed, the thoughtful chew on her pen as she pondered a question. He remembered vividly how she smelled, a mix of soap and paper with a faint sweetness, when she leaned in close. Everything felt utterly normal, until it wasn't. Clara raised her hand to answer a question, her voice faltering mid-sentence, her face blanched, not a ghostly white, but a sickly pallor. Her eyes unfocused for a beat, then she blinked, confused, and her hand rose instinctively to her nose. Blood erupted. It wasn't a mere trickle or a polite streak to dab with a tissue. It poured thick and dark, spilling over her fingers as if finally unleashed. It traced a path down her lip, pooled in the corner of her mouth, and dripped, slow and heavy, from her chin onto her desk. The soft, wet thud of each drop hitting the floor was what resonated most deeply in Alex's memory. Wrong. She gasped, choking, and more blood came. Warm, relentless, pulsing with the beat of her heart. A scream pierced the sudden silence. The professor shouted. Chairs scraped back as students recoiled in horror. Alex didn't. He leaned forward, his gaze locked. He observed the way the blood moved, how it contoured her face, clung to her skin before yielding to gravity. He noted the color transformation, bright crimson at first, then deepening as it thickened. He watched her hands tremble as she tried to stem the flow, how the blood coated her fingers, soaked into her sleeves, smeared across her desk like paint applied in a frenzy of panic. And something within him unlatched. He felt it before he could name it. A warmth spreading through his chest, a profound, grounding calm, as though he had at last tuned into the correct frequency. His heart slowed instead of racing. His breath steadied. The cacophony of the room faded until there was only Clara and the ceaseless flow. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't worried. He was, inexplicably, better. He knew, even then, that this profound, unsettling tranquility was something few would ever comprehend, let alone accept. He hadn't wished her harm. He hadn't wanted her to die. He simply wanted to observe, to understand, to commit to memory, the way something so hidden could reveal such unvarnished honesty. Blood, he realized, never lied. Paramedics soon arrived, their efficient movements a blur amidst the chaos. Clara was swiftly taken away, leaving a trail of blood-stained paper towels and crimson footprints leading from the lecture hall like morbid breadcrumbs. The room quickly emptied, filled with a palpable hum of shock. Alex remained seated. His hands were shaking now, not with fear, but with a profound sense of deprivation, as if something vital had been torn from him too soon. His skin felt tight, stretched, wrong. When he closed his eyes, he saw it again. The precise way it moved, how it obeyed gravity, how it rendered everything else in the room utterly artificial. That was the first time he understood that a part of him existed that belonged nowhere else. Back in his small apartment bathroom, Alex locked the door and scrutinized his reflection in the mirror, searching for any telltale signs within himself. He pressed his fingers against his nose until it ached, until his eyes watered, until his skin almost broke. He needed to see it again. Needed to feel that calm settle back into place. When his nose finally bled, just a few drops, it wasn't enough. It was never enough after that. And so it began. Not with malice, not with cruelty, but with a silent crush, with concern, with something beautiful shattering before him and revealing his true nature. Perhaps some would call it an illness, a perversion. Yet Alex felt it was not a path he had chosen, but rather one he had been undeniably pulled towards. After that day, he learned the art of patience. He learned to observe Clara subtly, to offer care in ways that appeared appropriate. He walked her to the campus infirmary when it happened again. He held doors. He offered tissues before she even realized she needed them. People described him as kind, attentive. They commented on how lucky Clara was to have someone like him around when her nose began to bleed. They couldn't comprehend how intently he listened. Each time it occurred, it was distinct. Sometimes it was sudden, violent blood breaking free as if escaping confinement. Sometimes it was slower, a creeping dark line forming just beneath her nose before she even noticed. Those were his favored moments, not for their drama, but for their quiet intimacy. Just the two of them acknowledging it simultaneously. He worried about her, genuinely. He delved into research on epistaxis, dry air, stress, fragile capillaries. He memorized symptoms and causes, ensuring no one could ever accuse him of indifference. He paid attention to her breathing, the tint of her skin, the precise way she tilted her head back as she'd been taught. But no matter how much he learned, no explanation ever felt expansive enough, because none of them explained why his own blood didn't evoke the same profound response. He tried, of course, in private, cautiously, telling himself it was merely curiosity. He watched it bead, watched it smear, watched it drip into the sink. But it was wrong, flat, lifeless. It didn't move with intention. It didn't speak to him. Hers did. For 6 months, that was sufficient. Observing, waiting, being near her when it occurred naturally. 6 months of convincing himself that this was merely concern, warped by circumstance. 6 months of believing love could manifest in such a way and still remain love. But 6 months proved too long to dwell solely within a memory. The bleeds grew less frequent. Or perhaps he simply became more acutely aware of their absence. The calm no longer settled as easily. The world remained loud. His chest stayed tight. He found his gaze lingering on her mouth when she spoke, on the spot where the blood used to gather, imagining it there again. He told himself he simply missed her being well. He told himself he was afraid something was truly wrong. That's how it always begins, with good intentions that seem reasonable, if one avoids scrutinizing them too closely. The first time he tried to help recreate it, he was gentle, careful. He believed that if he was precise enough, calm enough, it would be just as before. Just enough. Just a reminder. Just a return to the beginning. He was gravely mistaken. He hadn't intended to hurt her. He hadn't meant for it to unfold as it did. He was attempting to transport her back to that singular moment where everything made sense, where their hearts felt synchronized, where the world quieted around them. But this time, the crimson rush was too swift, too overwhelming. It didn't possess the same controlled artistry, the same obedient flow he remembered. Clara's terror, he realized too late, had corrupted the rhythm. Later, they would speak of her death. But for Alex, Clara wasn't truly gone. She had simply transitioned, moved to a different plane, closer to the yearning he had always carried. He could still feel her afterward. Not a physical sensation in his hands, but a profound presence in his chest. A certainty, as if she had found her way to the very core of his being. While others wept and screamed and questioned why, Alex felt a quiet resolution. He was held. He was certain. She understood. She knew he loved her. And she knew he couldn't stop. Not because he desired to inflict pain, but because stopping would mean losing her all over again. Because she was the only one who had ever made him feel whole, and fragments of her still existed in the flow, in the way blood moves when it's honest. Other people came later. Not as replacements. Never that. Merely as attempts to hear her more clearly. He didn't relish what followed. He endured it. He compared every drop, every movement, every moment of calm to the way it had felt with Clara, and none of them ever measured up. But sometimes, when it was close, when the world went quiet again, he swore he could feel her presence, and he knew she wanted him to continue. The chill that runs down my spine when certain memories resurface is a cruel, familiar torment. It's been a decade since that Thanksgiving break, since I was a bewildered 15-year-old, and the memory of what happened in the Montana wilderness had been a carefully buried secret, one I never wished to exhume. But some things refused to stay buried. It was my father, Mr. Davies, who drove my older brother Caleb, and me from our home in Oklahoma to my grandpa Silas's secluded cabin in central Montana. 10 days of escape from the daily grind, my father's predictable desk job, and Caleb's and my relentless school schedule. Grandpa Silas, a formidable veteran of the Vietnam War, had always been financially comfortable, his land a testament to his solitude and success. The highlight of any visit to Grandpa Silas's was always the hunt. My first taste of it was at 11, learning to aim an airsoft rifle at squirrels and chipmunks. Grandpa Silas took immense pride in his hunting grounds, instilling in us a deep respect for the land's bounty and the necessity of a swift, humane kill. Aim for the vitals, boys, he'd always say. Make it quick and painless. Our SUV crunched onto the gravel path leading to the cabin, where Grandpa Silas awaited us, flanked by his 2 bloodhounds, Willow, his gentle female, and Kodiak, the boisterous male. Their excited barks and slobbery greetings were a tradition, a warm welcome. Grandpa Silas helped us with our bags, ushering us into the guest room, where 3 king-sized beds promised comfort after our long journey. This trip was special, though. This was our first time elk hunting. Once we were settled, we found Grandpa Silas in the living room. He'd laid out 2 hunting rifles, an assortment of gear, and 4 ghillie suits. There were whispers of exceptionally large bull elk roaming the territory, and Grandpa Silas had his heart set on mounting a magnificent set of antlers above his fireplace. I imagined the grand display, a silent sentinel overlooking the room. "All right, boys," Grandpa Silas announced. His voice, a gravelly rumble, softened with affection. "Your first elk hunt. We might just have fresh venison tonight. And," he added, a proud glint in his eye, "a trophy for me. Can't we just hunt at night without these ridiculous ghillie suits?" Caleb grumbled, his skepticism plain. Unlike the rest of us, Caleb detested the ghillie suits, calling them cumbersome and claiming they constantly snagged on branches, despite our own ease with them. "Absolutely not," my father interjected, arms crossed. "That violates fair chase. We're not risking trouble over a ghillie suit." Grandpa Silas chuckled, a warm sound. "Tell you what, Caleb, you don't have to wear one. I usually have you boys wear them for the camouflage, but your camo clothes should be fine. Just try to be quiet." Caleb, already clad in camouflage, visibly relaxed. My father, Grandpa Silas, and I donned our ghillie suits, appreciating their ability to blend us into the undergrowth, offering a buffer against any accidental noise. I had a fleeting thought that Caleb might be a liability without the extra cover, but I quickly dismissed it. Grandpa Silas loaded the rifles and the 2 bloodhounds into his old Jeep. We bumped along the off-road trails for about 45 minutes, finally reaching a clearing overlooking a vast meadow. Just as Grandpa Silas predicted, a small herd of elk grazed peacefully, mostly cows and their calves. We positioned ourselves under the cover of dense bushes, our rifles poised. The dogs crouched silently beside us, waiting for a bull to emerge. After what felt like an eternity, a majestic rack of antlers, like bone branches, materialized from the thicket, followed by the imposing body of a bull elk. It was colossal, the largest I had ever seen, though admittedly it was the only bull elk I'd ever laid eyes on. "There he is," Grandpa Silas whispered, raising his rifle. The dogs rumbled low in their throats, but my father's quick elbow silenced them. "Good. Who's taking the shot?" my father rasped. "Can I?" I whispered back, a surge of ambition compelling me. This was my first elk hunt. I wanted to make it count. My father and Grandpa Silas exchanged a look, a silent debate about my readiness. Then they nodded. An ear-to-ear grin split my face. "All right," Grandpa Silas said, handing me a hunting rifle. "Aim for the side. A clean lung or heart shot will put it down quickly." I nodded, took aim, and focused intently through the scope as the magnificent beast lowered its head to graze. I squeezed the trigger. The shot exploded like thunder, sending the remaining elk galloping away with frantic bleats. We emerged from the bushes, only to see the bull limping away into the dense woods. Willow and Kodiak immediately bounded after it, and we followed swiftly. We tracked the animal for what felt like 20 minutes before we found it, massive and still, on the forest floor. We cheered, celebrating our success, the dogs joining in, prancing and jumping with excitement. Grandpa Silas then told us to wait while he retrieved the jeep to haul the carcass back. As we waited, I heard a rustle in the undergrowth below. Coyotes were common here, so I thought nothing of it. But what I saw next was far more unsettling. A figure, eerily human-like, yet completely naked, its skin a sickly pallor streaked with prominent varicose veins, appeared. It was severely emaciated, hunched over the elk carcass. I watched, bewildered, as the creature clasped a handful of the elk's hide in its gaunt fingers. "Hey, you okay?" I called out, concern mingling with confusion. The figure, with an alarming speed that defied its appearance, scurried into the thicket, vanishing like the coyote I'd initially mistaken it for. I jumped back with a start, colliding with my father, who caught me before I hit the ground. I looked up sheepishly as he raised a skeptical eyebrow. "You all right, son?" he asked. "Yeah, I'm all right," I replied, regaining my footing. He just dove backward into Dad. "What spooked you?" Caleb added, smirking. "It's nothing. Just a coyote," I lied, hoping to rationalize the unsettling sight. My father and Caleb laughed off my jumpiness, but the image of that thing wouldn't leave my mind. Soon, the familiar sputter of Grandpa Silas's jeep echoed through the gully. We watched as he began the methodical process of quartering the elk, using the jeep to support it, his knife and bone saw working deftly. He removed the antlers with the saw, stored the meat in coolers, and left the remaining carcass for the scavengers before driving back up to us. Eager for the feast, we piled back into the jeep and headed for the cabin. We immediately carried the coolers to the backyard, where Grandpa Silas had already fired up his barbecue grill. My father put on some country music, and we devoured the juicy venison burgers Grandpa Silas was famous for. We were so engrossed in the moment that the setting sun caught us by surprise. As the sky deepened into twilight hues and the trees became masked in shadow, we moved inside, settling onto the couch, the hounds dozing at our feet. "Great shot today, Ethan. We've got delicious meat, and your granddad got those antlers he always wanted." My father smiled, watching Grandpa Silas proudly mount the antlers above the fireplace. "They're magnificent," Grandpa Silas exclaimed, stepping back to admire his new trophy. "Biggest rack I've seen on a bull, and it's finally mine." "We know, Pa," my father called out good-naturedly. "You don't need to be a broken record until bedtime. You couldn't possibly understand what an achievement this is. For a hunter like me, a trophy like this, after all these years, it's something else," Grandpa Silas retorted, joining us on the couch for more conversation. Soon, we were all preparing for bed, anticipating a long day ahead. Just as I was settling under the covers, I heard the bloodhounds outside our door begin to growl. The growls escalated into a frantic symphony of aggressive barks, instantly waking my father. I hadn't even drifted off yet. We rushed out, finding Willow and Kodiak rigid at the end of the hallway, glaring into the living room. My father went ahead, motioning for me to stay behind him and the dogs. I heard his audible gasp as he stumbled back, so I quickly peered around him. In the faint light from the fireplace, to my horror, the same emaciated humanoid figure from earlier was staring through the large, sectioned window at the cabin's front entrance. Its eyes, glowing eerily, seemed to bore through the glass like twin incandescent bulbs. It placed a pallid, gaunt hand against the window, dragging its fingernails across the pane as if testing for a weak spot. Then, with heart-stopping speed, it sprinted off into the dense Montana wilderness. "Grandpa Silas!" I shrieked, my voice choked with terror, as footsteps thundered down the stairs. My grandfather burst into the room, rifle in hand. "What is all this commotion?" he bellowed. "It's 2030 in the morning. Can't a man get some sleep?" I was frozen, momentarily incoherent, trying to string together the terrifying images into a coherent description. Grandpa Silas raised a confused brow until my father, his voice low and hushed as if to avoid drawing the creature back, spoke for me. We saw something outside. Nothing like any animal I've ever seen in these woods. Grandpa Silas paused, his expression visibly shifting to one of profound fear, as if he knew exactly what was coming. "What did it look like?" he finally asked after a long, eerie silence, gripping his rifle until his knuckles were white. "A man," I finally blurted out, but he was, naked, and his eyes had this weird glow. "Stay inside," he rasped, cutting me off. "Go to your room, take the dogs inside, he's back." I had no time to question him. My father pushed me and the bloodhounds into the guest room, slamming the door shut behind us. Caleb was awake, staring at us with a bewildered expression, but we said nothing. My father and I just looked at each other in silence as the dogs whined and pawed at the closed door, which we were now barricading with our bodies. Silence stretched for a tense 10 minutes, then a series of loud gunshots shattered the air, followed by Grandpa Silas's bellow. "Stay in here. Don't move," my father whispered to Caleb. "Caleb, something's wrong. I don't know what it is, but make sure you keep your brother safe." My brother nodded as I dove into his arms for protection. My father slipped out the door in a flash, slamming it behind him as the bloodhounds erupted into a furious barking storm. More gunshots followed, then silence. It felt like 15 minutes passed before my father came rushing back into the room. I noticed several fresh scratches across his arm, which he clutched, gritting his teeth against the pain. Get your things. Pack everything. We're leaving. We can't stay here." My father's voice was urgent as he began stuffing his backpack. Not wanting to know why, Caleb and I did the same, scrambling to pack. We all hurried out of the room towards the back door, the dogs hot on our heels. We crept silently around the side of the cabin. Caleb and I worked to keep the dogs quiet, knowing their barking might attract whatever was out there. As we crouched toward our SUV, we saw a chilling trail of blood leading into the trees, originating from a dark pool where Grandpa Silas's rifle lay discarded. We fought back gasps and tears as we scrambled into my dad's SUV, tossing our bags into the trunk. I dove into the back with the bloodhounds as Caleb took shotgun, and my dad frantically sprang into the driver's seat. A flurry of slamming doors, the distinct click of the key fob, and my dad floored the gas. As we pulled out onto the road, Caleb screamed in horror. The same creature, now stained crimson, emerged from the bushes, making a terrifying beeline for our car. My dad didn't hesitate, speeding off into the night, leaving the cabin and whatever haunted it behind. We spent the remainder of our vacation at a pet-friendly hotel, mourning what we all knew was Grandpa Silas's death. Once back in Oklahoma, after the 3 remaining days of Thanksgiving break, my dad filed a missing persons report with Grandpa Silas's local sheriff's department. I won't detail the specifics, but the official conclusion was an animal attack. His body was never recovered. But my father and I knew the truth. We saw what we saw, and we knew the real culprit behind his disappearance. A decade later, my father and I still occasionally talk about that night. Caleb and I have unfortunately drifted apart over the years, but my dad and I share an unshakable bond, forged in terror. We both agree we will never set foot in Montana again. What we witnessed made one thing clear: that state is no longer safe for us. So, I'll stick to game hunting in the familiar safety of Oklahoma, for my own well-being, and to ensure I never experience anything like that ever again. Ilara felt a prickle of unease when a friend suggested scrutinizing her private chamber for hidden lenses. She'd scoured every corner of her room in the old cottage, finding nothing obvious, but the very thought was enough to set her teeth on edge. Another person offered a simpler, tangible test: a barrier behind the door. That evening, before the moon climbed high, Ilara secured her chamber door. The old iron lock clicked into place, and she carefully slid a small wooden stool beneath the brass handle. It wasn't wedged tightly, merely positioned so it would topple or scrape loudly if the door were pushed open. She paid meticulous attention to its angle, the faint indentations where its legs met the worn floorboards. Dawn brought a chilling discovery. The stool hadn't crashed to the floor, but it wasn't as she'd left it. It had shifted subtly, as if nudged and then meticulously realigned. The door remained steadfastly locked. At first, Alara tried to convince herself she must have disturbed it in her sleep, but she was certain she hadn't. The movement didn't feel random. It felt deliberate, precise. She kept her silence, uttering not a word to her parents or her younger brother, Liam. Later that afternoon, Liam inquired, "Why was there a stool behind your door last night?" Alara's heart hammered. "How do you know?" she asked, striving for a casual tone. Liam shrugged. "Heard a scrape. Figured you were rearranging your room late." Alara told him she'd been asleep early. He simply replied, "Oh," and let the subject drop. The next night, the ritual was repeated. Same stool, same spot. This time, Alara captured its precise position with a photo on her phone for indisputable proof. She stirred once in the dead of night for no apparent reason. The cottage was still, the only sound the wind whispering through the eaves. The stool held fast. The lock remained secure. The morning brought the familiar chill. The stool had moved again. The photographic evidence confirmed it. It wasn't a significant shift, just enough that an unobservant eye would miss it. Enough that someone could easily claim it was nothing. She hadn't confronted Liam. He was acting completely normal, perhaps even radiating an unusual cheerfulness. Her parents attributed her growing anxiety to stress and fatigue. They were still looking into getting a camera, but until then, the stool remained her silent sentinel. What truly unsettled Alara wasn't merely that something was touching her door. It was the unnerving precision, the invisible hand that seemed to know exactly how far it could push before its presence became undeniable. The Blackwood Creek region, like the rest of the Lost Pines, had been slowly recovering since the devastating wildfires of 2011. The scorched woodlands, once a graveyard, now sprouted with young, vibrant trees, interspersed with the char-scarred veterans. Yet, to those who looked closely, something was terribly amiss. Amidst the new growth, a different kind of living thing consumed, a presence unlike the natural cycle of flora and fauna. Eliza, a seasoned prepper with a keen eye for nature, had noticed it on a recent hiking trip with her friend Mark. What began as a routine excursion into the state park soon twisted into a nightmare. They had arrived at their parking spot, well equipped as always. Eliza carried food, water, binoculars, a knife, and a first aid kit, while Mark had his own water, a knife, an emergency shelter, and his personal carry handgun. They set off on a 4-mile trail, expecting a 2-hour hike. They had no idea what awaited them. Barely a quarter-mile into the woods, they came across signs of a dried-up stream. The terrain dipped sharply into a 30-foot crevasse just off the main path. Though venturing off-trail was a cardinal rule, their experience and the near-empty park emboldened them. Crawling beneath a dense canopy of young pines, carefully avoiding the thorny undergrowth, they reached a creek bed. It was strangely moist, thickly carpeted with moss, thriving in a way that seemed unnatural, given the dryness of the surrounding forest. As Mark mused about water likely collecting in the crease, Eliza noticed something peculiar. The moss pulsed, almost as if it were breathing. This verdant layer covering the stream bed swayed rhythmically, like seagrass, creating a slow-moving wave downstream. Both Eliza and Mark watched, fascinated. The movement seemed deliberate, purposeful. Eliza tried to look up information on her phone, but there was no signal. Mark, intrigued, tossed a twig onto the moss. It landed softly, then was carried downstream by the pulsing, muscle-like movements. Their wonder escalated. Then, against her better judgment, Eliza reached out and touched the moss. Immediate regret washed over her as a chilling numbness spread through her hand. She yanked her arm back, struggling against a glue-like grip. A viscous, mucus-like fluid dripped from her skin as she tore free. Her fascination evaporated, replaced by cold dread. She scrambled back to the trail, Mark following, questions tumbling from his lips. Both were left in bewildered silence, grappling with the bizarre encounter. Continuing down the trail, Eliza's hand slowly regained sensation. They decided, despite their fear, to track the stream's path, but with a strict no-contact rule. About a mile further, during a water break, Mark spotted a man about 50 feet off the trail, facing them. He appeared completely naked. They called out, but received no response. A silent debate passed between them before they decided to leave him be. But as they turned their backs, a branch snapped. Turning again, they saw the man was several steps closer. His hands were clearer now, and in one he held a sharpened stick, undeniably smeared with blood. Mark immediately drew his handgun, yelling at the man to stay away. The naked figure remained impassive, an unsettling statue. Just as Mark shifted his stance, the crunch of leaves and snapping branches erupted in rapid succession. The man was sprinting at them. Mark opened fire, missing the first shot, but dropping the man instantly with the second. Shaken but resolute, they knew they had to get out. They turned to run back the way they came, but the path had transformed. It wasn't different, but overgrown. More trees, more thorns, and a terrifying abundance of moss. They reached what should have been the quarter-mile mark, where they had first encountered the numbing moss. Now, it was everywhere, blanketing the forest floor. Thankfully, their shoes and thick clothing seemed to offer sufficient protection. A low moaning sound began to resonate through the woods, deepening into a weeping lament. It was haunting, impossible to pinpoint, as if every tree itself shared in the mournful cry. The old, rotten bridge they had crossed earlier was now completely collapsed. Beneath it lay the thickest moss they had yet encountered. Tucking their pants into their boots, they began to wade through. The moss was deep, rising to their stomachs, its pulsing waves threatening to drag them beneath the surface. Their shirts seemed to offer adequate protection, but the constant, muscle-like pulling made standing precarious. Eliza and Mark gripped the sturdy remains of the bridge frame for leverage, their muscles screaming. Suddenly, they froze. Footsteps in the nearby woods, followed by another pair, then another. Soon, a group of naked figures slowly wandered into view near them. Mark instinctively reached for his gun, only to remember it was submerged beneath the blanket of moss. Unseen, they remained utterly still, fighting the viscous, living current trying to pull them downstream, hidden beneath the collapsed bridge. As the figures eventually moved off, a horrid, cloying stench hit them, the unmistakable smell of rotting meat. Eliza scanned the area, her eyes catching a puff of fur. A rabbit. It lay on top of the moss, carried downstream by its pulsing movements, like food being drawn into a gaping throat. Maggot-infested and decaying, the rabbit still twitched, struggling feebly against the slimy current. Its desperate movements slowly ceased, and it sank below the surface. Extricating themselves from the moss-choked stream was nearly impossible. They owed their lives to the remaining bridge frame that had offered crucial leverage. They were supposed to be back at the quarter-mile mark, but it felt as though 3 miles had passed since then. Something was deeply wrong. Daylight was fading rapidly. Mark set up his emergency shelter in a carefully chosen hidden spot. While help was desperately needed, being found by whatever now haunted these woods was not an option. Eliza began to write, her hands trembling, chronicling their ordeal in case anything happened. Mark had gone to bed, leaving Eliza on watch, though she doubted sleep would come. At least they had derooted the ground around their campsite, creating a temporary moss-free zone. Mark disagreed, but Eliza felt they should follow the streams, believing they might lead to an escape. She knew he was probably right to be skeptical, but they had no other ideas. Dr. Eva Stone, to her eternal credit, was remarkably patient. It was her free day, and yet Clara had telephoned, demanding an immediate session. She'd offered Dr. Stone $5,000 for an hour, twice her usual fee. Clara sat in the reception area, trembling. The overhead lights seemed too intense, burning into her eyes, and the room's decor was slowly driving her to distraction. Green walls, green upholstery, green planters everywhere. Even the floor tiles were green. Green, green, green. So green. Why was it green? Was it meant to seep into her thoughts? Clara's fingernails were bitten down to painful quicks. Where could she put her hands? In her pockets. It felt too warm. Then, a moment later, it was too cold. Ben, her husband, sent reassuring texts every few minutes, a lifeline. She scrolled through them, her hands shaking, her stomach churning. "You're all right, Clara. It's okay, my love. I'm here. If it's too much, just leave." When Dr. Stone finally called her name, Clara practically lunged into her private office. Clara. Dr. Stone offered a tight, weary smile. Clara noticed her blouse was askew, strands of her typically neat bun escaping around tired eyes. She leaned forward, hands clasped, a faint coffee stain on her sleeve, a hair tie mark on her wrist. "What brings you here today?" "I can hear it again," Clara choked out, the words raw. "I hear it everywhere. In the living room, when I'm trying to relax, and the kitchen. It simply won't stop." She hadn't realized she was pulling at her hair until strands were caught between her fingers. "I'm losing my mind," Clara whispered. "I'm going absolutely insane." "A child," Dr. Stone stated softly. "You're hearing a child, Clara. I'm hearing a K-child." Dr. Stone gave a slight nod. "Very well, K-child. Can you think of any particular reason you might be hearing a child, Clara?" Clara shook her head, breathless, her stomach lurching at the mere mention of the word. "Baby. No," she whispered, poised on the edge of her seat. She felt herself fragmenting once more. "Can you make it cease?" Clara hissed. "I'll take any medicine, even the ones that make me ill. I'll take anything." Dr. Stone's patient smile faltered. "Clara, we have discussed this before," she said, her voice even. "You experienced the loss of a child, correct?" "I terminated a pregnancy early on," Clara corrected, her jaw tight. Dr. Stone was an excellent therapist, but sometimes her own convictions bled through her expressions, her gestures, even her carefully chosen reassurances. "Because it would have killed me. My health wasn't strong enough to carry a baby." "Oh, naturally." Dr. Stone nodded, her lips thinning. Her tone was sugary, yet Clara detected a bitter undertone. "I assume you consulted your husband, didn't you? Was he content with your decision, Clara?" A bitter taste rose in Clara's mouth. "Yes," she whispered, her chest tightening with an ache. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Painful. Health anxiety had stolen her peace. Heart palpitations signaled a heart attack. Already, her fingers instinctively sought her throat, feeling for her pulse. "Yes, Ben has always respected my choices," she affirmed. "You're doing it again," Dr. Stone immediately pointed out, and Clara's hands fell to her lap. "Clara, what you perceive is simply your body and subconscious attempting to tell you that you and Ben didn't make a mistake. But let's call it what it truly is, as we are all adults here." Dr. Stone held her unwavering gaze. "You made an ill-informed choice driven by fear. You're in a new city, 25 years old, which is an ideal age for childbirth, regardless of what you claim about your health." "No," Clara interrupted. "Stop talking. You are not permitted to say that." "Clara, you know I'm only trying to assist you." Clara snatched her handbag, hot tears streaming down her face. "I'm leaving." A flicker of something twisted in Dr. Stone's expression. "Tell me again, Clara," Dr. Stone pressed. "Did your husband respect your decision or not?" Clara fumbled with the buttons of her jacket, her fingers clumsy. "He did. And did he communicate that to you?" Dr. Stone demanded. "Did he state he was happy?" Instead of replying, Clara left the office and walked directly into her husband's waiting arms, letting herself completely unravel. Ben felt warm. Safe. She buried her face in his jacket and allowed herself to break. "I warned you she'd be a charlatan," he murmured into her shoulder. Ben gently pulled back, displaying his usual optimistic smile, with his freckled cheeks and warm brown eyes. It was like gazing into a comforting cup of cocoa. He carefully wrapped his scarf around her neck. "Let's go home." That night, though, she heard it once more. Clara awoke, drenched in sweat, her unfocused gaze fixed on the ceiling, crying. This time, it was louder, shriller, relentless. She slammed her hands over her ears. Ben was asleep beside her. Clara shook him. He mumbled into his pillows. "Are you okay?" "I can hear it," Clara cried, scrambling out of bed. She felt dizzy, gasping for air, letting her legs carry her. The crying seeped from every wall. Clara took a deep, shaky breath and began to rip down their wallpaper. Blue. Just like Ben preferred it. She tore a long strip, watching it peel away from the wall. The crying intensified, Swallowing ragged breaths, she stumbled closer, pressing her hands against the surface. She tore further, frenzied, stripping more wallpaper, until her hands discovered something taped behind the wall, Ben's old mobile phone, now playing Infant Whale Dobbin P4 loop. Somehow, she continued, even with the phone clutched in her hand, because the screams didn't fucking stop. Clara tore at the wallpaper until her nails were sore, her fingers raw, until she found another phone. Now playing Infant Whale, now playing. Infant Whale burst from her lungs. She stormed into the bathroom. Hidden behind their medicine cabinet, another phone. Now playing Infant Whale MP4 loop. She wasn't insane. Her fucking husband was. Mark sat at the polished oak table in Eleanor's quaint cottage living room, the quiet hum of the afternoon only broken by the occasional chirp of a bird. Her phone rang, startling him slightly. "Could you fetch that for me, dear?" Eleanor called from the adjacent kitchen, her voice light and cheerful. Mark reached for the device. "It's Sarah," he announced, reading the screen. "She says she hasn't found anything she likes and will have to keep looking." A sigh floated from the kitchen. My Sarah never did have much luck with clothes shopping. Far too particular, always indecisive. "Fancy a cup of tea, Mark? I imagine she's going to be a while longer." He groaned, settling deeper into the comfortable armchair. "Yes, please, Eleanor. I think I'll need to maintain my strength." Eleanor soon appeared with 2 steaming mugs and a plate piled high with golden brown muffins. "Are these your famous orange and cranberry ones?" he asked, already reaching for one. She smiled. "The very same." He devoured a few as they chatted. Eleanor spoke of her upcoming trip with friends and her busy schedule of activities. Mark reflected on his recent city break with Sarah and their exciting plans for the next one. After finishing their tea, Eleanor began clearing the table while Mark carried the empty muffin plate to the kitchen. As he dried the last plate, a sudden dry cough rattled in his chest. "Oh dear, did I make those muffins too crumbly again?" Eleanor asked, her voice tinged with mock concern, as she handed him a glass of water. He gulped it down, clearing his throat, and returned to the drying. A moment later, another cough erupted, more forceful this time. His throat felt suddenly parched, tight, an inexplicable itch blooming deep within. He set the plate down with a clatter, grabbing another glass of water. But before he could drink, a violent fit of coughing seized him, shaking his entire frame. The glass slipped from his numb fingers, crashing to the tiled floor. Panic surged through him as he fought for breath, the air seemingly trapped in his lungs. He stumbled, falling to his knees, his hands clawing desperately at his throat as if to tear away an invisible obstruction. His vision blurred, the room spinning, and then the world went dark as he collapsed, a crushing weight settling upon his chest. Through the haze, he vaguely registered Eleanor kneeling beside him. Her touch was not gentle, as she calmly adjusted his collar. I truly believed she'd found the one this time. Her voice was an icy whisper, devoid of any warmth. "You two were so good together, but that last trip, it was simply too much for my Sarah." She paused, her gaze chillingly direct. "Only the best for my little girl." Eleanor rose, her movements deliberate, and pulled a heavy black canvas bag from beneath the sink. "She's going to be absolutely heartbroken this time," she mused aloud, her tone disturbingly matter-of-fact. "It took her months to recover last time." With surprising strength, she rolled Mark's inert form onto the canvas, then began to drag the heavy bundle across the kitchen floor, through the living room, and out towards the back door. The cold evening air bit at his face as he was hauled across the overgrown garden towards a dilapidated woodshed. "At least you'll have some company for a while," Eleanor muttered, her voice now a low growl. With a grunt, she pulled open the rusted, heavy metal door of an old stone well concealed within the shed's floor. From the dark depths below, Mark could faintly discern the chilling sounds of movement, things rustling and scuttling in the blackness. The tiny, whiskered inhabitants of the Velvet Lounge's kitchen watched, astonished, as Lena merely shrugged after hearing their urgent revelation. She continued her endless task of rinsing dishes, her movements slow and heavy with an eternal weariness. Lena was the club's diligent, if often overlooked, dishwasher. "You're not going to alert anyone? The authorities? He'll be here tonight." One of the boulder rats squeaked, its voice shrill with urgency. Lena wouldn't meet their gaze, her eyes fixed on the soapy cascade over the glassware. "I know who it is now, you've just told me. I'll simply avoid him." "I'm not involving the police," she stated, her voice flat. The rats understood her reluctance all too well. Law enforcement held little kindness for Lena, a newcomer brought to town under duress. Her assignment to the dish pit at the Velvet Lounge was a stark indicator of her fate. Deemed unsuitable for the more lucrative and less savory establishments also run by the club's owners. Yet, even with this grim understanding, her dismissive reaction to the impending arrival of the New Year killer was baffling. "Surely you can confide in someone else?" they pressed. "I don't care," Lena repeated, a fresh shrug shaking her tired shoulders. Frustration rippled through the rat colony. The entire town was strung taut with anxiety, and their subterranean world mirrored that tension. They disliked disturbances among the humans. A killer operating on their shared turf was wholly unwelcome. The infamous New Year killer had made it a macabre tradition to strike precisely at midnight each New Year since the pandemic's dawn. His public letters decried the folly of crowds packed into clubs, yet his annual warning had only fueled a perverse fascination, drawing even larger throngs eager to defy fate. Already, the club was a hive of humanity. Excited chatter and the rising tide of body heat surged through the Velvet Lounge. The bar, in particular, was rapidly filling. Lena, despite the escalating chaos, paused to set out a small offering of scraps for her whiskered informants before resuming her work at a frantic pace. Staff darted past, the manager's shouts echoed through the kitchen, and the entire establishment pulsed with a frenetic energy. Midnight loomed, mere minutes away. The dance floor, a kaleidoscope of flashing lights, was utterly impassable, the noise a deafening roar. "Lena," a rat dared to squeak again, "will you slip some poison into his drink?" Lena's gaze, when it finally met theirs, was scornful. "Are you mad? The police would trace it straight back to me." The rats retreated into a huddle, their tiny voices a flurry of agitated chirps. Lena strained to catch fragments of their rapid discussion. "Just identify his glass, Lena. You can do that. Unlock the poison. Leave the rest to us." A sharp cry of "Lena" pierced through the kitchen din. She snapped back an angry retort, a muttered string of curses in her native tongue escaping her lips. With a profound sigh, and without another word to her furry confidants, she unlatched a small, locked cupboard. Then she moved towards Maria, a server with whom she shared a rare, quiet camaraderie, and whispered something urgent into her ear. Maria didn't reply verbally. Instead, her eyes flickered, and she gave a subtle, wordless gesture towards a specific glass on her tray. Lena turned back to the agitated rats, who were now scurrying impatiently around the open cupboard, and silently indicated the glass Maria had pointed out. On the dance floor, bodies pressed so close that movement seemed impossible. Yet Maria, Lena's friend, navigated the throng with surprising agility, distributing drinks. There were barely 10 minutes remaining until midnight when, amidst the pulsating crowd, a figure suddenly slumped to the ground. A wave of excited whoops initially swept through the revelers, mistaking the collapse for drunken abandon, or perhaps even the killer's anticipated strike. It wasn't until much later, as the new year officially dawned, that the chilling truth became clear. The New Year killer had been silenced, not by his own hand, but by an unseen force, and he was the victim, not the perpetrator. The night it happened, the usual symphony of the forest went utterly silent. That sudden void of sound, pressing in on our secluded cabin in the Wyoming wilderness, was what startled Robert awake. He rolled from bed and padded onto the porch in his socks. Over the dense pine forest, a peculiar light hung motionless and unearthly. No engine hum, no gentle sway, just a stark white disk, throbbing as if alive. Eleanor, his wife, appeared beside him, her voice a hushed whisper. "Robert, you see that too?" Before he could respond, a soft thud echoed from deeper inside the cabin. Not violent, but deliberate, like a drawer closing with unnerving care by someone who knew they were home. His lever action rifle felt cold and heavy in his grip as they crept down the short hall. A sliver of light, not from their lamps, escaped from their newborn son Lucas's nursery. The air grew thick with a metallic, burnt scent. Robert pushed the door open. They were small and hunched, 4 figures with skin the hue of damp clay. Their eyes, immense and devoid of any white, seemed to swallow the light. Their mouths worked constantly, a silent mastication. One balanced precariously on Lucas's crib rail, its elongated fingers wrapped around their son's tiny ankle. Lucas lay unmoving, gaze fixed on the ceiling, unnervingly serene. Eleanor's breath hitched into a silent, "Oh God, get away from him." Robert roared, the sound thin and inadequate in the confined space. His rifle trembled. One wrong move, and he'd harm his own child. The creature on the rail twisted its head unnaturally, like an owl, its mouth stretching into a ghastly semblance of a smile. They hissed, uttering a guttural language, a single word almost echoing his name. Eleanor let out a primal scream and lunged. Robert followed, the rifle almost slipping. He brought the butt down hard on the creature holding Lucas. The impact was a wet crack. It stumbled, still clinging to the rail, so he struck again. It was shockingly light. Its skin, soft as overripe fruit, split where the stock connected, oozing a viscous black fluid onto the dresser and floor. Eleanor, a whirlwind of furious protection, tore another creature from the crib, smashing a lampshade over its head without hesitation. They fought back, quick and sharp. A claw raked Robert's cheek. Another lashed out, catching Eleanor in the ribs. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, they scattered. The light outside vanished. The sounds of the forest rushed back in, a sudden, overwhelming chorus. They stood there, panting, the adrenaline coursing. What in God's name were those things? Eleanor cried. Robert had no answer. They triple-locked every door, holding Lucas between them until the first streaks of dawn. Weeks bled into months. Their wounds healed, but the terror remained a raw, open wound. Lucas thrived, too well, too fast. He rarely cried. His smiles, when they came, were unnervingly wide, too knowing. Once, Eleanor swore she heard that strange alien language drifting from his room. Last night, as Robert rocked him, his reflection in the nursery window showed eyes of pure, jet black. No whites, none at all,